All right, I guess we'll just start and people will join us. But thank you everyone for joining us today. So I'm Naomi. I head marketing at Kovrr, and we're currently working on initiatives to share some of our customers and our advisors' journeys on cyber risk quantification and how it's helped them better understand the risk that exists within their organizations, and maybe even more importantly, communicate that risk across the organization. So today we have Dmitry, former CISO at Avid, to share his experience with us. And I'll let him introduce himself in just a few seconds. But before we begin, these sessions are generally better when people have questions and comments. So feel free to submit questions and comments, and we'll make sure to address them throughout the presentation. And now, all yours.
Thanks, Naomi. Hello, everyone. So just to follow up on what Naomi said, let's start with introductions. I'm Dmitriy Sokolovskiy. Up until slightly more than a week ago, I was a CISO and the CSO at Avid Technology. As a CISO responsible for corporate security, for enterprise security, so that the regular CISO job. As the CSO responsible for product security, both in terms of making sure that the products are made securely, secure development lifecycle, as well as making sure that the products had necessary security features for our customers, basically my counterparts at other companies, to be able to plug into their respective security programs. For those of you that are not familiar with Avid as a company, I'll tell you what we have and for what we got for what we do, and then I'll tell you what we do. So over the last 35 years, Avid has received 1 Grammy, 2 Oscars, and 20 Emmy Awards for achievements, technical achievements in the entertainment and media industry. The very first piece of software used for video editing to basically, use a computer instead of trying to splice tape together by hand was Avid Media Composer back like in '87 on Mac 2, and since then it was just expanding. So today, I don't know, half of Hollywood movies are made using Avid hardware, software, or both. Newsroom studios, filming crews, Super Bowls, Olympics, live audio events, all of those things is where Avid has its impact. Before Avid, I worked for 11 years at CyberX Software, a identity and access management vendor, or privileged access security rather vendor, both on the deployment side, directive implementation services, incident response, education, partner ecosystem development, and so on. It's basically took the company from pre-IPO in 2007 all the way through the IPO, and at the very end also helped it get into the cloud as a cloud security architect. And prior to that, another 10 or so years in IT, sort of general IT all over the place, from networking to data center operations to security operations center and so on. So combines over 25 years of IT and InfoSec experience. Starting about 2012, when I got my CISSP, Certified Information System Security Professional. I also mentored for and taught for SANS for a variety of classes. Recently have added a couple of classes for vendors, specifically cybersecurity vendors at Audience First, and I'm an advisor to a number of startups, including Kovrr. And as an advisor, I usually am also participating in actually using the products, sort of eating our own dog food, but with an idea of incorporating these into my programs, and through that firsthand experience, being able to provide guidance and advice to the companies as they are expanding and growing. So that's probably it for the introduction. What Naomi asked me to talk about today is my journey through the cyber risk quantification, or the cyber risk quantification journey, how it started for me. And as we talked about this, preparing for this event, we trying to figure out what would be the best way to start. And we we thought that the best way to start this would be to talk about how it ended first, just to give you an idea of what we're able to get done. And then we can talk, sort of roll this back and, movie style, Avid style, do the, 18 months later or 2 years later, earlier, and how the journey started. So the end, let's say 9 months to a year ago, we as a cybersecurity team at Avid were able to quantify all of our digital risk, mitigate it, treat it, or transfer it, and be able to report all of that in numbers to the board and the executive team. In addition to that, we were able to use those numbers to also tell the whole return on investment journey for our team, using the cyber risk quantification information and numbers we were able to pull from Kovrr. And we were able to do that consistently, basically using Kovrr, not just justify the risk and the need for various tools, but actually go further and also show that the cybersecurity team is not just a cost center. It is a team that can actually deliver positive financial impact to the company outside of risk mitigation and sort of day-to-day protection mechanisms. Nomi, I don't know if this is there a place where people can be putting questions, or is that something that you're tracking? I don't know if people.
Sure. There's a Q&A, and it'll pop up for me. It should pop up for you as well. But it's on the bottom right of your screen.
I see it.
There's a webinar chat. So you can send it to the hosts and panelists, and then we'll make sure to answer it.
Perfect. So to Naomi's point, this event runs better if you guys are actively participating. So both providing your input as to how it's going, whether it's actually useful, or if you want me to dive into some specific areas as I talk about how this thing started. I get to see those questions, and Naomi will be able to also pull me off my soapbox when questions come. So that was the end. That's how we ended it. And actually, main reason why I left Avid is because my job is done. As a transformational CISO coming into the environment almost 5 years ago, none of this was in place, right? The team didn't exist. Nothing happened. Nothing was happening, except for some basic protection controls. But more importantly, no one could tell how effective or efficient the team was. And throughout that 5-year journey, everything that happened behind the scenes just supported and led us to the point where we're able to quantify the risk. We're able to express it financially, express it in numbers to our board and our executive team, and justify the decisions, justify the resource and spending decisions, both those that were made, to actually purchase or deploy something, as well as those that were made when we decided not to do something, because both types of decisions can be made with this information. So again, that's the end. How did we start this? Rolling back probably at least 2 years, I wanted to talk a little bit about the thinking, right? As a security professional doing the day-to-day work of vulnerabilities, patching, deployment of tools, education, awareness training, all the standard things that the cybersecurity team is supposed to be doing based on best practices. But every time we came to a conversation about budget, it was always trying to explain something nebulous. Yeah, we do need the money. We needed to, because there's this gap or this risk. But whenever the time came to try and explain or answer the question of, are we spending too much? Are we spending enough? Is this matching? Is our effort matching what the risk, what the threat actually is? We have a very difficult time explaining that. Every vendor, and as a result, every security professional is usually talking about risks, and the risks are ephemeral. We can't quantify them. We can't give them specific numbers, and that makes it very difficult to explain to anyone else who would try to justify the budget to, of how we approached it. How do we make the decision to go for something or not to go for something? What is the end value? And to us, the conversation is always about, but if we don't do this, something's going to burn, which may be true, but we were never able to say it. If we don't do this, this will be our cost. Well, I got a question. I'll answer. The question is, what security framework did you use in your assessments? Good question. So when we started we understood that we didn't know how good we were and whether we were doing the right thing. That's sort of a question that everyone asks themselves. Am I doing the right thing? In some industries, there is sufficient body of experience and evidence to justify and say, this is how you should be doing this, right? Whether it's, medical industry or most others have enough time in real life for that to be established. Cybersecurity industry is very, very fresh. It's very new. IT itself is only 35, 40 years old at most. Cybersecurity industry is maybe 20 when it's really started to get going. So, excuse me. So the very first thing we try to do is assess ourselves, right? That's a good question about the cybersecurity framework that we used, for the assessment. The first ones, and again, some of it is trying to figure out which one would work best. There are some of the things that are always asked for and unknown: ISO 27001, NIST CSF. There is the Center for Information Security, the Internet Security, CIS. Used to be CIS 20, now it's CIS 18 critical controls. There are a variety of different frameworks and best standards. The thing that we try to do when we picked ours is to be able to answer questions and answer them in certain way. So when we look at something like CIS, Center for Internet Security 20 and now 18, that is a very prescriptive, technically detailed framework that is very useful for my team to check themselves against, and then if finding gaps, trying to figure out what the next step would be. But it is terrible at trying to explain to people who don't have technical experience why, and more importantly, what is the sort of maturity levels. It's not terrible. It's a lot more difficult because you have to dive into the details. So we used CIS 20 and then 18 for internal assessment to give specific pinpointed guidance to my teams, to technical teams that are doing various work, to understand what should be done next. And when we started trying to explain that to the higher ups, we inevitably dove into details, technical details, too deeply. And that was the continuous feedback, right? You're giving us too much technical data. And we, from the security perspective, were always wondering, well, what else can we give you? We have, that's all we got. That's how we decide what we do. And so I started looking at other frameworks, trying to understand if there's a better one to explain the overall situation without going too deep into the technical details. The one that we chose was the NIST CSF Cybersecurity Framework, which is a combination of a number, or it came after a number of other frameworks that NIST kept releasing, and it was a purposeful release, that NIST CSF framework, aimed at getting up to the higher level. So we used the NIST CSF to show maturity to our higher ups, while we use the CIS to use for specific technical guidance. They overlap almost completely in this, because you really are describing the maturity in Naomi, is that something I can do? I can share some images on the screen.
Yes, you should definitely be able to.
Let me try that. I'm not gonna let me see if I can do share. And then I'm gonna share this. Oh no, host disabled participant screen shares. You may have to give me access to be able to share.
Sure. Absolutely. I'll do that right now.
So while Nomi's doing that, so the NIST CSF as the maturity assessment framework that we use to show to the board and to the executive team the state of various things. And oh, there we go. I got access. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I want to make sure you guys are seeing the image, this page with a bunch of CMMI images. Is that correct? Is that what you guys are seeing?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Any one of them can be used. Let me take this one here. You can see that it's CMMI is a way to measure maturity of things. Now, it could be processes, it can be tooling, it can be people, any number of things, and depending on what you are measuring, there's different ways to explaining different things. So let me see. Here we have. This is another one here. Right. So this is describing maturity of a process: initial, repeatable, define, manage, optimizing. There are. Here's another one describing different levels of maturity. And let me see if I can find even better picture that shows. Here we go. This is probably a good one here. So here is a little bit of a deeper description into what different maturity levels mean from the quality, productivity, and risk perspective. And let me see if I can find one more that makes it easier. There is a good one. Another one. Again, describing the level of capability. So level 1, initial, otherwise described as heroic efforts. Whenever we have to do something, in the middle of the night or never seen it before, and now we're really making this up as we go. We spend a lot of time, a lot of waste on trying to figure out what to do, but eventually we get it done. That is what we're talking about with heroic efforts. If we can do this fairly consistently, meaning we can make heroic efforts be recurring, repeatable, we can actually do this consistently, is when we've reached the second level of maturity or managed. Our processes are now managed. We have at least something in place and we're able to do it. As we continue to do that and we spend more time defining, writing down what we do, we get up to the defined or process standardization level. And the level up from there is being able to measure what is it we do and how, reaching level 4. Level 5 is the sort of the top level, continuous process improvement. This is reserved for very, very mature organizations. Usually for the business, and this is what I told my board and my executive team, is we're looking to reach level 4 and sort of stay there. Anything above that becomes too expensive. 80-20 rule, this is about 80% done for 20% of cost. If we're trying to get up to the last 20%, we're going to have to spend a lot more. And so majority of companies, unless you're maybe a hospital or some military installation, this is where you would stay. There's another image that I actually used right on my my board deck. This one here, another way to look at it. One building another. I'm gonna stop sharing. So we used NIST CSF as the thing that tells us how to measure. What to measure, and then CMMI levels to actually that was our measurement scale. And CIS 20 and now 18 for directed technical guidance for the security team. And that both of those were on corporate and enterprise side. On the product security side, the frameworks are different. There is either BSIM, that's a good framework, but it is made by a vendor, Synopsys. And then there is SAM, SAMM, Software Assurance Maturity Model, which is an open source framework, but they are fairly similar to each other. They are, again, giving specific prescription to what needs to be done from security development lifecycle, and then giving you tools to measure how well you're doing that. So those were the assessments that we use and continue to use at Avid still. But they weren't enough. When we measured ourselves and we can provide those numbers, we can tell that we are in fact improving. So from every quarter that we, I'm going to say answer live. I'm going to mark it as done. I think that one is answered. Hey, by the way, if that wasn't a sufficient answer for the question about security frameworks, please follow up with a question. But I think that we'll cover that as closed. So we were able to show that we were maturing. We were able to explain what level of maturity we were at different subsets of the company or the information security program. And we were able to plan ahead and show the expected levels of maturity we're going to reach. We had a goal and so on and so on. But that is still a very subjective description. Again, if you're having your presentation to the executive team, if you're having your presentation to the board, numbers would be better than using subjectivity trying to explain a very objective situation. The board and the executive team operate in money, in numbers. And if the security team or any team really cannot have a conversation in that same language, then we have a very hard time explaining what and why we do. And part of the problem is that we, cybersecurity professionals, neither we, the cybersecurity professionals, nor the board, and nor the executive team are trained in measuring risk in numbers. It's something that everyone wants to do, but very few people are very specifically trained in it. So it becomes a situation where we don't know how to describe and they don't know how to ask. And so we're consistently at this kind of like slow burning conflict because we are trying to explain the need and necessity based on subjective things, not really emotions and feelings, but still not hard data. And they understand that they're not getting objectivity, but they don't know how to ask for it the way that we would understand either. And this continuous struggle of not speaking the same language is what continuously made it difficult for us to explain what we're doing. So we knew that we needed to shift our discussion into money somehow. But how can we do that? And this is when the studies started to be used. We're talking about the IBM cost of breach study. We're talking about the DBIR from Verizon, though there's not specific numbers there for the cost, but there's still some information that could be useful. And so a study like the IBM cost of breach study that comes out every year. And by the way, if you're not subscribed to it or if you're not looking for it every year, you should. Regardless of what is your level of knowledge, it's very easy to read and understand what happens and why it happens and what is the financial impact. It breaks things down by the type of impact. What if you do something, if it improves your cost of or lowers the cost of breach, potential cost of breach. If you do other things, they will actually increase the cost of breach and so on. It's very revealing. So I would definitely highly recommend you sign up for it and read it every year. But the data itself is very, very broad, right? We're getting our averages, but we're getting the averages across basically the whole industry all at once. And we all know that that's not very accurate, right? If we are looking at something like close to $4 million average cost of a breach, that's a single number to describe a huge range of possibilities. And if you start digging into the study, you see that there's actually different cost per record lost during a breach, depending on what kind of industry you are. In a medical industry, you get up as high as $400 or so per record. So if you lose, let's say, 10,000 records, you multiply that by 400, and we could say that could be the cost. Now, these costs are inclusive of all the major things that you would have to pay for during the incident. So first of all, obviously, the actual incident response itself, the immediate involvement of the retainers, of the security providers of all kinds, or if you have a local sort of your own information security response team, involving them, doing the forensic analysis, recovery of the equipment, the loss of productivity, the brand damage, the potential impact for sales afterwards. Again, all of that sort of data aggregated from hundreds and hundreds of breaches, and summarized in sort of a single number. So it is somewhat useful. It gets you at least an idea, sort of which direction you're looking at. What is it, $1 billion or is it $1 million? It gets you closer, but it doesn't give you enough specificity. But that's all we had. And so I used those numbers to try and paint the picture. I used that study. I used the studies of public companies and impact on their stock price following an incident, and try to paint that picture to my management again. You know, and I try to stay conservative again, knowing that these numbers are fairly significant. They are, I mean, the numbers are very broad. I try to stay on the conservative side of the evaluation. The lowest possible number of records that could be impacted, the lowest sort of most best matching price, meaning per record of the list that's provided by IBM study, and came up with some crazy numbers. We're talking hundreds of millions in losses. And when I brought that to my management, they said, "We don't believe this." And I said, "Wow, how can you not believe this? We have studies, we have data. This is what we're seeing." And the management said, "Look, that may be, but we don't see it happening. It's just not realistic based on what we're seeing in the market and the potential damage that could occur to us, and the amount of loss we can sustain and so on. It just didn't seem real." And that was very disheartening, because apparently I found the numbers already. We already got we got what we needed, and that's still not being believed. And part of the reason is because, again, these numbers really looked at not you, not me, not my company. These numbers were, again, generic pool, random, and a generic pool that was averaged out across the whole industry. So we needed to do something better than that. Enter Kovrr. A friend of mine here in Boston introduced me to Yakir, the CEO of Kovrr, and we had our first conversation about measuring the potential impact. And I, just fresh off these meetings where I was told, "Look, this is just not real. We don't believe you," not in those words, but really close to that. I wasn't sure that anything else is going to be able to help me here. And so we're having the conversations with Yakir. The thing that struck me right away in what Yakir was telling us, and what the Kovrr product is using for data, is that they're using real data, actual insurance claims information from companies that suffered breaches and actually submitted insurance claims. So we're not talking about some potential loss. We're talking about actual losses for which evidence was submitted and data was actually collected and justified with very specific costs. So that told me that the quality of data and specificity level was much higher. So this is something that we could actually use partly because the data quality was better, but also because my management and the board understood what insurance is, versus me trying to talk about something that might be happening. Insurance view is, I mean, the way insurance in general is a hundreds of years old as a business, right? It's a very mature approach to quantification of risk, and the insurance, the actuaries and so on come as close as they can to the realistic numbers, because they're trying to make money on it, right? There's a sliver of profit that they're trying to make when they insure someone, and the only way they can do that is if they get really close to reality of what the real cost is, right? And they can figure out exactly what the premiums are and so on, and be able to make money on this. So benefit one, data is a lot more accurate and a lot more specific. Benefit two, the management team and the board understand how insurance works and what that means if insurance companies involved in participating in the assessment. And the third piece of the third benefit that I thought was something that we haven't touched at all is context. We're talking about the IBM study and so on, and their assessments and their numbers are almost outside of context completely because they're so broad. They're covering the whole market. We need to get more context and matching context with who we are and what we do. And so we can do that if we look at all that insurance data, because not only do we see the claim, we also see the information, or not we, but Kovrr sees the information from before the claim was filed, meaning what it was the initial submission, which shows what the company thought were its level of controls, and then subsequently whether that actually matched the reality or how much that matched reality after the breach, because the assessment by the insurance company afterwards is a lot more rigorous. And so we can tell what did the company say they had in place from security controls, what was the actual amount of damage incurred, and what was the real level of control that was assessed during the post-breach investigation and the claim investigation. And that gives us an unparalleled realism to the data. It's not just what happened after, it's also verification of self-assessment of your security controls, and it allows you to paint the full picture. If we are aiming to be this, these are the kinds of losses we can expect. And by the way, on average, the realism of the data that you provide as someone who wants to be insured, there's also ability to narrow that down as well. And when I saw that, I understood that this is going to give me ability to get real close. Let me pause here first, and before I dive into the biggest thing that I learned, to see if any questions. Oh, we just got one. Can you give an example of an Avid area of risk that your team found from the assessment, and how Kovrr helped you quantify it? Yes, I can. And I'll leave this question. I'm going to say answer live, so I'll answer it live, and I'll leave this to the second part of my deep dive into what we were able to get done at Avid, because I want to cover a little bit more generically, and then I'll talk about specific areas of risk that we covered. Any other questions about what I've discussed so far? I'll give you guys a minute to type a question and get a drink of tea. Also, any feedback, or if you want me to speak slower, speak faster, use a different language or whatever, please put that in there as well. We're working through improving these webinars, make sure they are valuable for you guys. That's our priority, making sure that there is something you're learning from these. Okay, so let's move on. Before we dive into the specific areas that Kovrr helped us with, and the specific process of what we went through, I want to touch on a little bit on what is CRQ sort of philosophically, and why why are there so many issues getting it done correctly and then using the results correctly. Cyber risk quantification is trying to measure and quantify, give a number to something that isn't certain. And this is a very important concept to understand. That's kind of the basis of all of this. The goal, of course, is to be able to come up with an exact number. The problem is that we are dealing with probabilities. When we're discussing risk, there is always going to be a component of probability. How probable is something? How probable is it that something will occur? And that's not an exact number. There is a built-in uncertainty in that. And this word uncertainty is something we need to touch on a little bit more. You're all familiar with ISO 27001 standard, the Information Security Management System assessment standard. ISO 27002 is the actual guidance that should be followed, and 27001 is the way to certify that you are in fact following it. And there is a definition of risk. There was a definition of risk that was used within that. And most of you are probably familiar with it. It's some variation of threat multiplied by vulnerability. And both the threat and vulnerability had a probability component. So we were concentrating on a technical variables, and trying to use that to establish some specific number. And again, both of them were probable, meaning there was a different chance of them occurring. ISO, which is an organization that defines standards out there in general, released another standard not that long ago. It's called 33,000, and it is a standard for risk management specifically. And they have a different definition of risk. They don't concentrate on a specific technology or technical aspect of a thing. They're talking about risk in terms of results. So the ISO 33,000 definition is risk is result of uncertainty on achieving or trying to achieve objectives. So you have something you're trying to do, something you're trying to achieve, and the risk is coming from uncertainty that something is or isn't one way or the other. When we don't know something, the risk increases. And again, we're talking about uncertainty, something that we don't know. We're trying to get a number, something we do know, a very objective number, and we're utilizing subjective things, subjective meaning without hard definition. We're talking about ranges of things, from 50 to 100. And inevitably we sort of realize, well, that can't be, we can't be specific. We can't come up with actually a number. We can find sort of the middle number, but it's still not a guarantee that it'll be that number. So, wow, what a waste. We can't come up with a real number. This whole thing is a waste. Or is it? When we're dealing with things that are uncertain, we have to accept the fact that we are not going to be able to get a specific number. We have to accept the fact that what we're trying to do is get better at guessing. Another way to describe it is calibration. I call them, I don't know if they're parents of this, but definitely the couple of guys that are in the early, that were there in the early days of risk quantification and still visionaries in the field. Doug Hubbard, who released the how to measure anything in cybersecurity. I have the book somewhere back on the shelf. Rich Eisen, they're talking about the fact that humans on average suck at guessing, right? Like if you go to a casino, your chance of guessing successfully whether it's red or black is 50 or below. It's below 50, about 40%. And for things that are that sort of easy to identify the numbers. There's 49 black, 49 red, or whatever, 48 maybe, and two greens. It's easier to know that it's 50%, just like visually, you know what you're dealing with. But when you were talking about regular life, estimations in regular life, we're still, our success rate is still about the same, 40 to 50%. There is a process that you can go through called calibration. You can actually learn to guess better. Basically, that's what it is. And if you're calibrated correctly, and if you are utilizing the calibration techniques, your guessing can get as accurate as 90%. Again, this is backed up by data and research that is available. They have it. The idea is that if you're preparing yourself, if you surround yourself with proper data, if you measure it correctly, and most importantly, avoid various biases and mistakes usually made with analysis of data, you can get a lot more accurate at guessing. You can get as accurate as 90% at guessing. What does that mean for us? It means that we're not going to be able to say exactly whether it's 3.5 million or 4 million or 5 million, but we can get pretty close, and we can get between 3.7 million and 3.8 million. Is that a specific number? No, it's not. But is it good enough for us to be able to make most of our decisions? Yes, it is. And so when we talk about cyber risk quantification, we have to understand that it's not there to give us a specific number. It's there to calibrate, help us calibrate, give us guidance on how to calibrate ourselves in this process and how to get as close to the number as possible. In a way, you can think of it as hurricane predictions. If you've seen the hurricane coming from the Atlantic tropical storm Matilda is bearing down on the Caribbean islands, and you see the projection of how it's going to move. There is the central line, and then there is in gray ever expanding path showing you the probability where the hurricane could end up in. And again, that's sort of still based on what information we currently have. And then in the middle, that most likely path that a hurricane will take. So being able to narrow down from the whole of Atlantic or all of the Caribbean to a path, a much narrower path, is done is done by people who have been calibrated on guessing weather patterns. Same idea, and most of the time they're correct. Sometimes freak accidents, black swans in statistics, you may end up with this tropical storm moving completely off the path, but most of the time you're going to be somewhere within that path. So this calibration allowing us to visualize where we're going to land on the numbers, or near where we're going to end, is the point of CRQ for us. It allows us to get more us meaning cybersecurity professionals. It allows us to calibrate our guesses much better, get closer to reality. But there's another benefit to CRQ and what Kovrr brings in it. It allows us cybersecurity professionals to speak in the language that our CFOs and CEOs use when they're talking about things at corporate governance level. They're also calibrating their guesses. If you've ever seen budget planning in a company, it's usually based on revenue and sales, and it is a range. It's always a range. Best case scenario, worst case scenario, most probable scenario. And that is adjusted as the situation changes. In a very similar way, we in cybersecurity should be able to express ourselves, thereby actually speaking the language of the people who give us our budgets and to whom we are really responsible at the end. I'll pause here. And Nomi, I don't know, you're the only person that's actually here with me. Is what I'm describing, does that make sense? Am I
Yeah, and everyone could give him a thumbs up as well.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, I don't know where we get
Yeah.
thumbs up, but that would be useful. Just as a side
Sure.
note, by the way, when I say, does that make sense? I don't mean that any of you are unable to understand what I'm saying. The reason I say, does that make sense, is because as someone who is neurodivergent, I sometimes may be saying things that typical people just actually don't understand. I may not be speaking coherently. And when I say, does that make sense? It's not because I think you're stupid. It's because I don't think I want to make sure I am making sense. It will make sense to me and no one else. And so I want to make sure that that's the case. So that's why I asked if that makes sense. So CRQ allows us to get more calibrated and come much closer to the reality of what we are facing. It accounts for, and this is how calibration works. It's not that complex if you think about it. It's just making sure and questioning, asking the why for every piece of information and confirming that it is realistic. And if it's not, adjusting just enough, just a little bit, to get closer, to minimize the error, to get as close to the number as possible. And when we ran our numbers through Kovrr, now when we say ran our numbers through Kovrr, and now we're starting to answer the question about which area of Avid it helped us with. The way we work with Kovrr is at least right now, I think there's some additional improvements to the product just very recently, but the way we did it back then was we provided information about the company, the things that we found, the things that we thought were important. And Kovrr is guiding you through this by asking the questions of what is it that, what do you have, different types of environments, number of records, locations, things like that. The things that Kovrr knows are important because that's the kind of information it already has in the data sets. So it asks us that information, and then it asks us to assess or give it information about our self-assessment. Back in the time when we were doing it, there were available the CIS matching, or being able to upload my controls in CIS 18 format as well as NIST CSF. At the time, we had both, and I ran the numbers for both. NIST CSF was more realistic from our perspective, simply because between the two, CIS and NIST CSF is more, it's more subjective, actually. Again, it's aimed at measuring maturity, so it's not finding specific numbers. It does sort of more subjective assessment. And between the two, CIS, where we had some very specific technical controls we haven't touched yet, it would give us major gaps, which we knew weren't actually gaps yet. We didn't, so we already understood that the data we had on the CIS front wasn't as good, wasn't as calibrated as the data in the CSF. And so we used NIST CSF results, NIST CSF maturity measurements, and that's how Kovrr expects it as well. It asks you for a specific area of NIST CSF and asks you what is the maturity level from 1 to 5, very similar to what I was showing you from the CMMI. And so we provided that information. And in combination, what Kovrr does with that is then matches that against the data set using a simulation. It says, okay, well, if we run these numbers the way you have them, and we pretend for you to actually live through this, through these events for 10,000 years, and every time we do this, we are using the numbers from the insurance claims that we have to guess the possibility of different things. And as we do enough of them, that's why the Monte Carlo simulation, we're talking about 10,000 iterations. When you get a sample large enough, you will get calibrated just by the number of events. We don't need to get into the details of this, of the technical specifics. And this is what I understood as well. Monte Carlo simulations and the way to do statistical analysis like this is an established science. It's not something that we have to come up with every time. And more importantly, you don't need to understand it in detail. If you are interested, again, there is literature, and you can dive in deeper and actually understand how it works. And again, the same Doug Hubbard and Rich, the FAIR Institute have very detailed documentation. But for our purposes, we don't need to dive in. That's the whole point of having vendors that are doing it for us. Suffice it to say that at the end of the calculation, once we provide our numbers and the calculation, the Monte Carlo simulation runs through, we get many iterations and eventually come up with the numbers showing us the potential risk. Now, what does that actually mean? Potential risk. What is that? And we talked about uncertainty, not knowing exactly what it's going to be. But let's talk about it just for a second, what it means in real life. What is from cybersecurity perspective, what are the things that we're trying to measure? We have an incident. Someone hits a phishing link, gets a piece of malware in their computer. The local antivirus on the computer flags it, even maybe stops the attack. And then the computer has to be rebuilt. The person who's working on that computer now loses, let's say, a week of their time. The security team is 2 or 3 days worth of work to forensically assess the computer, rebuild it, issue it back out. The amount of time will differ, but just in that alone, we haven't lost any data. We simply had a computer that had to be rebuilt. That alone has a productivity impact in the company. The person whose computer was gone for a week wasn't productive. If that person was responsible for projects, so other people were impacted, my team, cybersecurity team, had to dedicate some efforts to resolve it. The computer itself may have to be replaced, and so on. There is a cost. No matter how good we are as a security team, there's always going to be the cost. And this cost every year, we call it the annual loss, is an expected amount of money we as a company, or any company, should expect to lose every year. Even if we have a full, amazing security team, there's still going to be some loss, some productivity loss. That number is called residual risk, residual remaining risk, remaining amount of loss that will most likely occur. Again, based on the claims numbers that were submitted anyway, even if people or companies had security teams. And we have to accept that. That's a thing that's going to happen. As a security team, we cannot be perfect. We have to accept that. That means there will be losses that we can't cover. We have to accept that. We have to understand that this is reality that's going to occur. So the cyber risk quantification is helping us measure the minimum that we should expect to lose every year, even if we have a security team in place. And if we know that, from financial perspective as a company, we can plan for that. If every year, 100 pounds of bananas are going to go bad in a supermarket because they weren't bought on time, they got squished or whatever, it's expected loss, something that's going to happen, and we have to just accept it as part of doing business. In a similar fashion, there will be residual risk remaining after whatever controls you implement as a security team. There's still some things you're going to have to accept as losses. When we talk about exactly how it helped Avid, so if we're looking at Avid, and after running this simulation, we have 2 major pieces of information that will come out at the end of a Kovrr simulation. We're going to get residual risk, sort of the number that we should expect every year, even if we have the security team. And we can also tell what will be the largest possible damage, complete amount of money that could be lost, worst case scenario, or the lowest probability event. So that 1% when we really get breached, really get nailed, what would that be like? What would be the cost to us based on the number of records we have, the systems we have, our size, our industry, and so on and so on. So that range, and I don't know, Nomi, is that something we can show on the screen, or do we not have? I don't think I have.
We're just running a little bit short on time.
Oh, we already. I didn't even track the time. Am I going too far? Oh wow.
Yeah. Where you're really making it to the end. But we can always follow up with all the attendees and share that with them.
Well, it threw me off. I only had 2 minutes left. So after running a simulation like this and identifying that we had a certain amount of money, let's say $1 million of residual risk every year, and the largest potential amount of money lost, this gives us ability to plan financially. My CFO will be able to say, okay, I expect to lose about $1 million. This is a cost I'm going to take. And spending a certain amount of money, my budget, on the security team, we are able to mitigate or close or protect ourselves against much higher risks if the security team isn't there. One thing that you can always do with Kovrr is run the simulation without showing any of the controls that you deployed. So you simply can tell how bad can it be to be able to compare the difference between the two. I don't think we won't have enough time to dive into the specific example. So maybe, Nomi, this is something we can take as an action item and use it as the next starting point.
Sure, absolutely. Or we can even record it and send it over as well.
That's true too, as well, right?
So thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any additional questions, I can come on camera as well. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll send over a recording as well. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.